revelation.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode. It is Tuesday, November 18th, 2025. So, Jeffrey Epstein and his limited hangout, really what it is the establishment's limited hangout. And I'm going to talk about what exactly that is. You see, it's not just about pubescent girls. It's about a whole slew of other vile acts. Not just done by Jeffrey Epstein, but he is certainly the lightning rod. And also I'm going to talk a little bit about communism and the establishment. You see, if you didn't know, communism isn't just a conspiracy, isn't just a contagion, but it is indeed the controlled opposition. You see, socialism was put into place to funnel all the revolutionary type thinking into one place. A place, a system, a scheme that was built for these revolutionaries to put all their hate against what is indeed a corrupt system at times. But the corrupt system controls the opposition of socialism and communism, which is actually worse than free market, you know? So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And we're going to get into the news in just a second. I only got about 20-something headlines to get through. And one of the main problems today is the Cloudflare hack that is disrupting all sorts of things on the internet, disrupting the whole internet. It's more than likely a hack. Because Cloudflare, their business is to prevent against this sort of thing, and they themselves were indeed attacked. So as I mentioned about Jeffrey Epstein, the question isn't what individuals, and that's kind of where the limited hangout is, what individuals went to Jeffrey Epstein's island or on his plane and had sex with underage girls. That's not the question. The question is what organizations in the world, not just in America, knowingly allow sexual predation of minors, and not just young teenage girls, but children of both sexes. And as the malfeasant agenda comes to light, the establishment readies the global population for AI gods and a totalitarian nanny state. All right, why don't we get into the news? I got a lot of distractions going on here today. I got this guy's putting a new roof on next door, and we obviously have the problems here with Cloudflare that's affecting a bunch of the news. And as well as my connection, it seems, here, my connection to X. So I just need to fix a couple of things here. All right, let's get into the headlines for today. Tuesday, November 18th, 2025. Let's read the news. All right, we're going to start out with Zero Hedge. I'm panicking. What the fuck? Cloudflare outage sparks global internet chaos. And you might be wondering exactly what is Cloudflare. Zero Hedge is reporting Cloudflare global network experiencing issues. And Cloudflare, of course, says, we're on it. Some sites, places on the internet have been restored. Some still have connecting problems. If you're trying to sign in and stuff like that, the security around sign-ins, like for X, was problematic this morning, and I don't think I'm streaming on X right now. So what is Cloudflare? Cloudflare Incorporated is an American company that provides content delivery network services, cybersecurity, denial of service, mitigation, wide area network services, reverse proxies, domain name service, ICANN accredited, domain registration, and other services. Cloudflare is in Silicon Valley, well, San Francisco. Cloudflare is used by around 19.3% of all websites on the internet for its web-ready security. Well, there it is. First and foremost, about 20% of the internet is using Cloudflare. So One American News is still down. I had a bunch of headlines I was going to use from that site, but it's down. And as I mentioned just a second ago, still having problems connecting that signing in to X. The app still seems to be working. I did sign into X previously, but trying to log in for live stream, I don't think is working right now. All right, let's get to the topic at hand for this morning. PJ Media is reporting the White House just nuked the Democrats over the Epstein files. What are they talking about here? Well, this is the thing. So, or this is what we understand. I don't even want to say what we know because it hasn't been confirmed yet or corroborated. So, a lot of us have been following this story for 20 years. You know, it's a couple decades of Epstein. So, Trump gets into office, promises release of the Epstein files, whatever. We know people are going to be implicated that don't want to be implicated. But the Democrats all of a sudden started bellowing about the release of the Epstein files. Why? Some of them believe that Trump is going to be implicated and that's why they're doing it. Or they're told by their Democratic handlers that Trump is going to be implicated, so press for the release. But the Democrats were in power during Joe Biden, and they didn't do anything about the Epstein files. Why is that? Well, we know. What does all that mean? What does that tell us? What does that lead us to know? And what it is the Democrats and a bunch of Democrats are implicated in Jeffrey Epstein's minor sex trade, sex trafficking. And we're going to talk about that today. So, but why would they want to push the release if they're going to implicate themselves? They thought they'd be able to handle it because they have people on the inside, apparently, in the FBI still. And as we found out by just looking at Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, that there's some very serious, scary stuff going on over there. And the FBI is not going to be fixed. It should be removed and replaced. And Kash Patel vowed that he was going to go in and he was going to take the J. Edgar Hoover building and turn it into a museum. That's probably what it should have happened. But the FBI they're an intelligence service. They don't play by the rules. They're not the good guys. They're the bad guys. And so there are obviously people in there that were planting evidence on Trump and were destroying evidence on Democrats. So the liberals thought it was safe to push for it, again, to implicate Trump. And they say there's a client list. There's no client list. It's a limited hangout. In other words, it's the same thing as Me Too. They're trying to say that the worst thing that's going on in the Me Too movement was people of power using their influence to coerce women to having sex with him. It's worse than that. It's not just women and it's not just young girls. And that's where we get to Jeffrey Epstein. It's not just women and it's not just young girls. The reason Jeffrey Epstein came to fore as a limited hangout, maybe they realized they were going to burn this guy, or maybe too much information came out about him, and they go, it's perfect, we'll use this as a limited hangout. That'll cover, so when people talk about child sex, people will think of 16, 17-year-old girls, not 4 or 5-year-old children. And that's the point that we're getting at. It's like voter misconduct, voter fraud. It's the tip of the iceberg. And that's with all malfeasance, is you see a little wrongdoing and you're like, oh, is that all? That's not that bad in this shifting morality of the 21st century. It is bad. And even the Wrap has the headline, the Epstein emails show that conspiracy theorists are right. Again, I should say, eyes wide shut is real. It seems there is a code among people with power and money who are pals no matter what side of the aisle, no matter what sins. And if you ever listen to Alex Jones, he always says, well, it's demonic, because it is. The thing is with child predation, sexual predation, is it's the stealing of innocence. And that's the aphrodisiac in that. That's what gets people off. Story goes on to say that their theories, full-on corruption, this is conspiracy theorists, that their theories of full-on corruption in the upper spheres where power lives are valid. Of course they are. That the eyes wide shut cabal of political and financial interests married to sexual deviance depicted in Stanley Kubrick's 1999 film is not, in fact, fiction. It's reality. And then he goes, well, conspiracy theories are false. Conspiracies are false, but the Epstein emails suggest otherwise. So what I put forth in my lead here was cabal of political and financial interests married to sexual deviance. We're not talking about individuals here, and that's the limited hangout, is they're going to throw out some sacrificial lambs, maybe Larry Summer, maybe Bill Clinton, maybe. They wanted that sacrificial lamb to be Donald Trump, obviously. They want things to fit their agenda. But it's not individuals. It is organizations. So I want to put forth the idea that esoteric organizations, first and foremost, right? The occult, you could say. Occult practitioners, their organizations, married with financial organizations, corporations, but also cabals of corporations and political organizations as well, including the DNC and other groups. That's what I'm talking. That's the implication. That's when they said, oh, if this comes to light, it's going to ruin. They always use this fear tactic. That if people really know that there's going to be a financial collapse. Yeah, they wish. PJ Media also has the headline, Democrats doctored Epstein evidence and the GOP has receipts. We know this. And this is the whole reason that they didn't go after the Epstein files during Joe Biden. They're trying to use it to leverage against Trump. And as we found out, both within the FBI has planted evidence implicating Trump, has doctored evidence to implicate Trump. Obviously, we saw that with the redaction of Virginia Giuffre's name, and we knew what she said, and we knew the content of those emails, but also from other places. So that's why they're pushing for the release, because they destroyed stuff that implicates them or some of the people, and they manufactured stuff to implicate Trump. Now, anybody on the left would, take task with what I had to say and said, well, but the proof is in the pudding, which is, if it was all about Trump, why not release this stuff under Joe Biden during the campaign? They didn't think it was going to be an issue. There's some questions there as well. But there's certainly receipts. We hope the investigation goes forward and these things are released. I don't care if they name individuals. I imagine they're going to throw up individuals, but certainly organizations or clubs won't be named, right? Because you have to, the thing is with the Epstein thing, you have to connect all the dots. And it's coming into full view exactly what the framework is between the social and business groups that come together around Epstein. Like I said previously, it's the view of a morally corrupt future. And a lot of these people just thought they were untouchable, so they'd go ahead with what they were doing. Sometimes willingly allowing themselves to be videoed performing illicit acts because they want to be controlled. That was the Hunter Biden thing. He didn't care. He knew he was controlled, so he did it to himself. Zero Hedge has the headline, Larry Summers goes into hiding, messages sought Epstein's advice on cheating with daughter of CCP official. So Zero Hedge comes clean with what we were wondering, which was places like NBC and stuff would report that, Larry Summers was just having an email exchange asking about unidentified woman, dating advice, they called it. But realistically, he was having an affair with the daughter of a Communist Party official. So he was himself compromised by the fucking Chinese. That's who the woman was. And then we'll go into ABC News's take, which obviously is going to be pretty slanted. They just say that they lead with him saying, Larry Summers, that is, he's deeply ashamed, steps away from public life after Epstein email. Summers served as a Secretary of Treasury under former President Bill Clinton. He flew at least 4 times on Epstein's aircraft, the Lolita Express, according to flight records made public during litigation against Epstein. And he was the top official at Harvard during a time when the university received millions in gifts from Epstein. You see how it works now? But those gifts were received prior to Epstein's guilty plea. Doesn't matter. Everybody knew what the fuck he was doing. Now, they could only say that association is clear after his conviction. But everybody, including we, before he was convicted, we all knew what he was up to. If he had so little ability to distance himself from Epstein, even after all that was publicly known about Epstein's sex offenses involving underage girls, then Summers cannot be trusted to advise our nation's politicians, policymakers, and institutions, or teach a generation of students at Harvard or anywhere else, said a statement from Elizabeth Warren. So not only is Larry Summers trying to distance himself from Epstein, but everyone's trying to distance themselves from Larry Summers. Don't forget, who is Treasury Secretary and is considered a financial luminary. Largest donation was $6.5 million gift in 2003 to Harvard's program for evolutionary dynamics. All right, full stop. This is what I'm talking about. People don't understand what they were doing. They were They were cloning. They were advanced in cloning, evolutionary dynamics. They were genetically, the research that Jeffrey Epstein was into, it's eugenics, genetically perfecting people, using Jeffrey Epstein's own DNA to make a super Boys of Brazil type thing with Jeffrey Epstein's DNA. They were impregnating women to use the fetal matter, stem cells, etc., from their own DNA for life extension, etc. So Epstein was named a visiting fellow, but it even says here that Epstein lacked the academic qualifications visiting fellows typically possess. Of course not. Summers' first known flight on Epstein's craft was in 1998 when he was Deputy Treasury Secretary in the Clinton administration. I'm sure he was with Bill Clinton. According to the flight logs, the plane took off from Aspen, Colorado, and landed at Dulles Airport outside Washington, D.C. Now, I just want to make a quick note here that this flight, you see the way ABC does this, because they're going to say, oh, his wife was there. The Lolita Express, keep in mind that it wasn't just the island, it was the airplane. Passengers on the airplane, there were young girls on the airplane. Passenger stewardesses with paper uniforms that could be ripped off. There were young teen girls on these flights that were performing massages. So people on these flights were having sex with underage girls. It wasn't just at the island. And we're not really sure what took place at Epstein's other properties, probably similar stuff. But it was important that these acts were done in a way and in a place that couldn't readily be investigated. That's why the masseuses were considered flight attendants on these planes. And once the people were in the island, they knew nobody was watching to see if young girls were going in and out of the building. That was the problem with like Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan townhouse and other places where he lived. Zorro Ranch, not as much. But in Palm Beach, etc., is that people could see young teenage girls going in and out and then older men going in and out. And that's what they didn't want, because obviously people could make the connection. Summers is also listed as a passenger once in 2004 and twice in 2005, including one flight that took off from Bedford, Massachusetts, and landed in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Yeah, and it says that the December 2005 flight listed Summers and his wife as being on the flight. So ABC News tries to run cover for Summers and said, well, on one of these flights, his wife was there. Well, Bill Clinton went to Jeffrey Epstein's island a couple times with Hillary. That doesn't mean anything. And it was only one flight that his wife went on, probably to dissuade her from what she figured out was happening. Who knows? All right, and there's more on Thomas Crooks, if you didn't know. So what do we know from this is the New York Post has an article. Thomas Crooks used they, them pronouns, had obsession with political violence and muscle mommies. I'm not even going to go into the story. I read through the text. It doesn't really give us anything new, except that he was into muscle mommies. I don't know, some sort of dominatrix fetish. So what we're trying to figure out here is, where was the flip? So he grew up as a young boy. He was patriotic, and in high school still, he favored Trump and conservative politics, but still violent fantasies, and then flipped. Right in 2020 during COVID, Now, we know COVID was the source of a lot of trauma-based mind control. So a susceptible loner kid, he was probably caught up in that. And so he just succumbed to the same psyop that young kids all over the country were caught up in. And so you cast a wide net, and then they monitor people online and see who's a ripe candidate for the kind of actions they want to take. You even have some Congress people during podcast interviews now saying that this guy, Crooks, was manipulated on purpose, intentionally. Some people refer to it as the left. I refer to it as the establishment, because this is a military-grade psyop. This isn't just some whoopsie, oh, we build all this technology and we don't understand the effect it's having on people. Of course we do. Of course we do. You're taking the same technology as a television set, you're putting it in the hand of people, you make it interactive, which has little benefit for the target, but has a lot of benefit for the establishment. The Federalist has the headline, report Biden admin hid online footprint of Trump's would-be assassin. Of course they did, because they put him up to it. The Biden administration had critical information about Thomas Matthew Crooks, the person who shot President Donald Trump and 3 others in Butler, Pennsylvania throughout the 2024 election, according to the report from the New York Post. Yep. The Federal Bureau of Investigation under Biden appears to have knowingly lied to Congress. Indeed, Christopher Wray lied, and the assistant director lied, the deputy director lied. Misled the American people, and at best was negligent in its duty, at its best, to track Crooks after he reportedly made numerous statements about committing political violence and assassinations. This is what I've been saying for a long time, and it brings it into full focus. That people within the intelligence community surveil everybody, pick weak-minded targets, people with mental illness that are on SSRIs or not on SSRIs, and get them on SSRIs, and use nudging, psychological manipulation techniques such as nudging, because they know how this works. And they nudge people into committing acts of violence, targeted acts of violence. You know, you don't just get people to go out and shoot anybody. In some instances, yes. In other instances, no. Like at Crooks, you specifically target political people. And also with school shootings, you're obviously targeting certain schools, and then they're ready for that person when that person shows up. And then they run the drill that coincides with the actual act of violence. If there's violence. Like with Uvalde and Sandy Hook, I still haven't seen any indication that a crime was committed. Not saying that it didn't. I'm just saying I didn't see any signs. The kind of shit they show isn't indicative of a crime. All right, let's move on. So, speaking of left-wing crazy town, and obviously the establishment, left or right or whatever, is involved in some pretty heinous shit. Obviously, manipulating people to cause violence is pretty fucked up. It all came out of the super soldier Manchurian candidate MK Ultra shit back in the 50s and 60s. And they didn't stop the program. They just used the technology and the knowledge they had to move forward and so forth and so on. You get people hooked on SSRIs, which clearly state it causes suicidal and homicidal ideation. And that's another thing about Crooks. Was he on any medication? Oh my God, no, his body was fucking cremated. Why did they do that? Because he's probably on SSRIs. Why else would he be acting like such a fucking maniac? Anyway, more leftist bullshit. New York Post, Michigan education officials' response to how many genders are there sparks fury, crazy as hell. Now, basically, this woman just dodged the question. Michigan education officials under fire after her response to a Republican state representative asking her how many genders there are went viral. And this has to do also with the same shit with Ketanji Brown Jackson. What is a woman? You know, if gender is an expression or gender identity is expression, whatever. There are only two sexes, okay? Or there's intersex or hermaphroditic individuals. Michigan Chief Deputy Superintendent Dr. Sue Carnell, Deputy Superintendent of Schools for the state of Michigan. She's not like, it's not like a district or municipal superintendent. Found herself between a rock and a hard place when Republican Representative Jay DeBoyer pointedly asked her about how many genders exist. Well, you can believe what you want, but science says there is two. Firestorm of a backlash quickly ensued online after the clip of Carnell's response went viral. She didn't say there were many. She just said, I don't know. Some people believe there are many. Unreal. State Superintendent Sue Carnell doesn't know how many genders there are. Watch as she draws a complete blank and refuses to answer. This is a person responsible for Michigan kids' education. Crazy as hell. Is caught up in the grips of institutionalized mania. And that's another thing. They keep talking about institutional racism, structural racism, but there's no evidence of that. But here, obviously, there is. And there's more. The New York Post, Democratic senator fires staffer who posed as illegal immigrant lawyer to spring him from ICE custody. Senator Tammy, who ain't worth a duck, said Monday she has dismissed a staff member who posed as an immigration lawyer to secure the release of an illegal immigrant from custody. Duckworth told acting Immigration Customs Enforcement Director Todd Lyons in a letter obtained by Fox News that neither I, of course, she didn't have any involvement, nor my leadership was aware of, authorized, or directed the actions of Edward York. My office has terminated the employment of said employee. So that's lawyer jargon. So this is the way the conspiracy works. They never pass notes that implicate anybody. They never say out loud. Usually if they do, it's in coded language. But everybody within a conspiracy, whether it's this one or anybody else, knows exactly what the objectives are. So if Senator Duckworth says, see what you can do to help the poor fellow, the staff member knows what that means by any means necessary. So she perfectly knows what was going on. She uses the same fucking rhetoric as all the other Democrats do. She's not as crazy as Mazie Hirono, but she's still not worth a duck. More liberal madness. Tennessee judge temporarily blocks National Guard deployment in Memphis. The judge says the case raises important questions concerning the use of the state's military forces for domestic law enforcement purposes. So, well, the New York Times obfuscates because not once in their headline do they say the National Guard was not called by President Trump, was called by the Republican governor. So, and guard is not troops, because they're a National Guard, they're guardsmen. So all they can do is guard. You follow me? They can't engage. So what people don't understand is that the National Guard, and what the New York Times doesn't understand, is that the National Guard is not arresting people. They're just there to protect mostly federal officers, or in some cases local and state officials, from conducting law enforcement operations. Because if you go to certain cities, like Memphis is really bad, very high crime rate. And so it's chaos. And so they have to establish order. So you can't just have a group of officers go in there and try to make arrests, because the whole friggin' ghetto is going to come out and try to obstruct you. So if you have troops there, it prevents that from happening. So the troops are there to prevent riotous behavior from affecting or obstructing law enforcement. Tennessee judge on Monday temporary block, because it can only be temporary. They have no legal right. They can only injunct. Block the deployment of National Guard in Memphis, siding with the state and local lawmakers who argue that Governor Bill Lee had overstepped his constitutional authority in sending troops to the city. They're not fucking troops, they're guardsmen. And it's within the purview of the government to call up the National Guard. It's even within the purview of the President of the United States to do it, especially in instances where federal law enforcement is being interdicted. Local and state officials have pushed back against the use of troops in Democrat-led cities that President Trump has described as overrun by crime. There it is. They allow the crime to happen, and I'm going to get to another instance where somebody with a long rap sheet is just let back on the street, and then they end up killing people. And there's more, because Democrats just don't allow crime to run rampant and then refuse actions taken by others to restore order. So you know what they're getting at here. Crime is out of control, and so they're not doing anything about it, so somebody else sends in a solution, and then you fight the solution. Real Clear Politics. Fareed Zakaria, if America has an affordability crisis, it tends to be in places Democrats govern, of course, because of the crime, etc., etc., etc. If America has an affordability crisis, it tends to be in places Democrats govern, like New York, Illinois, and California, all which feature high taxes, soaring housing costs, and stagnant outcomes in the basic areas like education and infrastructure. Why? Because it's socialist. Consider New York City, the country's largest and most important metropolis. The mayor-elect wants to spend more money on shiny new programs, but surely it would be worth first asking what happened to the money already raised. There's more. In 2012, towards the end of Michael Bloomberg's mayoralty, the city's budget was about $65 billion. Today, it's almost twice that, $116 billion. An increase of more than 75% in just over a decade. Spending has soared while the subways deteriorate, housing costs rise, public schools remain mediocre despite spending more than $36,000 per pupil per year, the highest in the nation among major school districts, and the outcomes still suck. The result is a paradox that defines much of blue state America: governments that promise more cost but delivers less. New York State mirrors the city. Its spending has risen from roughly $70 billion in 2000 to more than $230 billion today. What did I say? More money, more grift. About twice Florida's budget, even though Florida has 7 million more residents. When voters see that record, they conclude, not unreasonably, that more money is not the answer. Democrats, liberals, no. It's not the answer. Yet Democrats' instinctive response to every problem remains the same: spend more. Why? Because they're criminal. It's the grift. More money, more spending, velocity of money, the more opportunity to get kickbacks or to skim or what have you. The truth is that local government in the U.S. is already living on borrowed time. For decades, states and cities have traded short-term political harmony for long-term fiscal ruin. Socialists, that's you. Across America, these obligations act like slow-motion fiscal time bombs, invisible for now but guaranteed to explode. Meanwhile, daily governance suffers. In too many Democratic strongholds, regulation has metastasized into paralysis. Housing is unaffordable because local zoning codes and environmental reviews, rent control, and union carve-outs make construction painfully slow and expensive. Really? That's the thing. That's the reason Democrats and liberals can never argue. They can't do math. It's there in black and white. You keep spending. It's the whole Keynesian thing. Debt doesn't matter. It does matter. Deficits don't matter. They do matter. Because you're spending more and getting the same thing. Mostly because inflation. Thank you, Joe Biden. Okay, Uzbeki terrorist. This is PJ Media. Uzbeki terrorist found driving trucks in Kansas with Pennsylvania license. So this guy, I think Bakharov was his name, he's a Kansas resident. He was in the country. He was found to be in the country illegally and was apprehended by Border Patrol, but then released into the interior of the United States by the Biden administration. Then he was given work authorization. Then he obtained a commercial driver's license. And he didn't kill anybody yet, but imagine him filling a semi-truck full of explosives. So in all due diligence here, he is suspected of terrorism in Uzbekistan for distributing terrorist material, literature. It's Uzbekistan. So Uzbekistan is authoritarian. So anybody who's against the government, terrorist. But the origin of his terrorism is jihad. So it's Islamic terrorism. So it is what it is. You have to take that at least a little bit seriously. Fox News. Texas raid targeting Trinidad gang leads to arrest of 140 illegal immigrants. The San Antonio raid was part of a joint federal task for a joint federal, state, and local effort to dismantle transnational criminal networks operated across the southern border. Good. I just don't have sympathy, even for people that have been here a long time, that are here illegally. You know, your day may come, or it may not. You know, I'm not cheering for your deportation, but if you get caught up in a raid and you're deported, I'm sorry. That's the law. Like I said, I only have tolerance for a couple of different types of scoff laws, and one is speeding. The Washington Times, if you didn't hear this, Trump stands by Tucker Carlson after podcast with anti-Semite Nick Fuentes. I put in my 2 cents about Nick Fuentes. I could care less. He never says anything insightful, so who cares? And then it's the shock jock thing. He says a bunch of shocking things, and people are like, ooh. Maybe that's the political road to go down. It isn't. See, the thing is hate benefits the group you're hating on. Because they use it as material and say, you see, we're under attack by anti-Semitism everywhere. It's the same thing with racism. If you're racist against blacks or people of color, then they're go, look, I told you we were right. Look at the racist. And the thing with Tucker Carlson is, I'm glad that Trump stood by him and said, well, Tucker Carlson is a journalist. He was interviewing somebody. That's what they do, good or bad. And he also said, yeah, because they asked him about Nick Fuentes going to dinner with him once. He goes, yeah, I invited Ye. And Ye brought a bunch of people with him, including Nick Fuentes. So it was kind of a bait and switch thing. And he says, I really don't know Nick Fuentes. Apparently, he's not such a good guy, but I don't know him. So, but he backed Tucker and said Tucker has the right as an online interlocutor to question anybody he wants. Real Clear Politics. You might have seen this if you watch Real Time with Bill Maher. Bill Maher rips Democrat socialists. If you think Mamdani can reinvent the wheel, you're in for a rude awakening. Thing is, socialism will fuck you because socialism, to put it simply, doesn't work and never has worked. I know the kids think that the stuff that happened before their appearance on the planet didn't really happen, but it did. We've run this experiment many times, and the results are always obvious. And then he shows a map at night of South Korea and North Korea. I mean, many people have seen the satellite image of the Korean peninsula. And South Korea is full of lights and cities and things. North Korea is completely black. Maher goes on to say, and people there have high wages, low inflation, cars, vacations. He's talking about Japan. Meanwhile, Venezuela traded capitalism for Hugo Chavez socialism in the 21st century, which turned out to be like socialism in the last century or any century before. It's a fucking mess. It turned one of Latin America's richest countries into one of the poorest. Low wages, high inflation, shortages, outages, 8 million people fleeing. If you think New York can somehow reinvent this wheel, you're in for a rude awakening. Yeah, socialism doesn't work fiscally. If you want to say, oh, culturally, that's why China developed some sort of fascist hybrid, that's going to come here. Socialism for social control. And then above that, you have the capitalist players who are able to work within the government confines. He goes on to say democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up with the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million, but when liberal tie-dyed Vermont tried it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like the poor fuck in the Oval Office last week. I mean, he's making these references that you might not understand. Yep, we've already had a lot of socialism. Oh, but there's more. Social Security, he goes, we already have socialism here, right? They're Democrat. Bernie, AOC, Mamdani are not Democrats, they're Democrat socialists. People don't know that yet. I don't think people realize we've had a lot of socialism already. Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veteran benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program is building weapons for the Pentagon it doesn't even want. All socialism. That's why I tell people all the time, I believe in a social safety net. That is sort of socialism. And people get on me for that, but I want it to be poor. I think we should provide for indigent, the elderly, the handicapped, etc., but it should be poor. If you got the cable television global package, global gold package, and you're driving an Escalade, you shouldn't be getting a stipend from the government. A radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing, but more. Yeah. The establishment wants communism. It's to control your ass. It's not full communism like, because even in the Soviet Union, corporations were allowed to do business there. Apple's allowed to have a manufacturing factory in China. It's 51% owned by the Chinese. The Chinese, the communists. It's effectively slave labor. And everything's controlled, so you don't have to worry about any democratic process. The people they always talk about democracy, saving democracy, yet they don't care that the corporation that manufactures their favorite device is using non-democratic principles to institute basically slave labor, indentured servitude, to make it so your iPhone is only $400 instead of $800, or $800 instead of $1,600. All right, more of what I already told you. The Federalists, how propagandists and Politico use corruption to hide their ignorance. It's not ignorance. This is where the Federalist gets it wrong. Politico charges corporations and special interests tens of thousands of dollars annually for coverage they advertise as being written by very smart people. But in reality, most of the reporters at Politico and places like it consist, and this includes The Hill, of glorified interns who serve as stenographers for someone else's talking points, mostly those corporations. And when their sloppiness, ignorance, or all of the above get exposed, the publication stealth edit pieces or otherwise try to rewrite history in rather pathetic attempt to avoid admitting fault publicly. I don't agree. Politico is an intelligence organ. It's not sloppy or ignorance. What they're doing is purposeful fascism. It's corporations, right, covering the government with the hands in each other's pockets. It's not. They make it sound like they're just a dumb journalism outfit. They're not. They're bought and paid for by the corporations that own them, who actually also own the government. So there's no reason to trust anything they say. All right, a big crime story here. You might not have heard of this one. New York Post wacky wig maker Miriam Yarimi gets sweetheart plea deal from judge for killing mom, 2 kids in horrid New York City crash. And the point here is that this person, who I guess is 33 years old, drove on a suspended license after racking up more than 93 traffic violations, including 20 speeding tickets that led to more than $10,000 in fines. She's also rattled off a long list of unhinged, hateful rants after the crash, telling first responders she was possessed, had the devil in me. She won $2 million in a suit from 2023 against the NYPD, contending that when she was 14 years old, that was 15 years prior, she was coerced into sex with a uniformed cop. She seduced a policeman, God knows for what, in what context, had sex with him, and then 15 years later, sued the department for $2 million. This chick is crazy. But the point is that she was driving on a suspended license, so she should never have been driving. So if you never should be like an illegal alien, if you shouldn't have been in the country or shouldn't be behind the wheel of a car, the penalty should be much worse. So she killed a mom and her 2 kids, and she's a crazy nut job who shouldn't have been driving in the first place. Not only, and apparently she's a lunatic, that when she was 14, she seduced a cop. And then subsequently has been acting like a lunatic. She said she didn't kill anybody. after the accident. More lies, zero hedge, reality caught up to climate change. If you don't know what happened here, obviously, was whether man-made global warming was truly responsible for increased temperatures rather than natural, often centuries-long cycles of heating and cooling of the planet. Can't do that. Also, that everything from declining fertility to forest fires was ridiculously attributed to climate change. All a bunch of bullshit, as we already know. If climate change exists, whether or not it's man-made, certainly we know why they're attributing it to the consumer, because it's industry and irresponsible scientism of DARPA and the United States government shooting plasma beams into the atmosphere, not knowing what would happen, and then they fuck up the atmosphere, and then they have to take subsequent steps to correct for their mistakes. Me driving a gasoline vehicle isn't the reason that we got problems. More from the Federalist. AI idols will make idiots of us all if we let them. AI Jesus. Humans have a long record of worshiping created things rather than the creator, so artificial intelligence is merely the latest iteration of an idol. Soulless, conscienceless, morally devoid, pseudo-smart robots with a penchant for deception and unbridled affirmation are obviously not the omnipotent, omniscient God of the Bible, but that doesn't stop the idolatry of AI-powered chatbots that resemble God. Actually, they don't, from rising in the era of a large language model. And the funny thing is the iteration of a soulless, consciousness, morally devoid. If you know anything about the Bible, or Jewish mysticism, it's the golem. So what the golem is a pile of clay that was animated through witchcraft, black magic. Arguably, the most of culture's idolizing of AI probably falls into the man will create a godlike superintelligence category, a cultic belief in which feeding the AI the cumulative intelligence of man unlocks the doors to immortality, wealth, and world peace. But the Axios report raises the specter of a more specific version of the idolatry involving the substitution of AI for Jesus Christ, in which I said many years ago already, the singularity, AI will be the Antichrist. It's the fake Messiah, obviously. And when they introduce the Jesus that comes out of the clouds and the hologram, and a bunch of people will believe it, it's not too smart to do. It's the golem, and people should recognize it for what it is and not be like, well, because people don't. The problem is with people on the right, they don't separate social progressivism from technological progressivism. It's the same thing. It's marching forward without fully understanding the landscape. So you end up marching off a cliff. You're not concerned with the unforeseen consequences of your actions. Let's just go ahead with it. We'll see what happens. All right. Sorry. The thing with AI just freaks me out. All right. You can't handle the truth. Zero hedge. UK health watchdog reportedly refuses to release data on vaccine deaths. Yeah, no shit. Why wouldn't they do that? Because we know what the shots did. Not only the shots, but I keep saying this to people, we know what the virus did as well. It both manufactures self-replicating lipid nanoparticles. That's bad enough. And then you want to get into the graphene, and there's alternatives. That's even scarier, but let's just stick with the admitted self-replicating lipid nanoparticles that fuck people up. Fucks up your mind, calcifies your pineal gland, stroke, heart attack. See, and they knew it was going to mimic things that are already considered a health crisis, right? So people die of stroke and heart attacks all the time, just not when they're 34 and supposedly healthy. Because apparently there's, if you're athletic, it drives, the clotting is driven more. I don't want to get into the biology of it. But my wife had a good friend, super athletic, hiker, runner, black belt, ate healthy, was super concerned with health, had no prior, was in the top of his health, had no prior anything, went out for a run, died of a heart attack. I mean, he was 50-something. It's not terribly old, but he was at the pinnacle of health. You might have heard this, Fox News. UN Security Council backs Trump's Gaza peace plan after Walz calls territory hell on earth. Ambassador credits Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff with brokering the deal that includes multinational stabilization force, all Muslim countries. Just the News, United Nations approves President Trump's peace plan for Gaza. Peace, peace, peace. He's the peace president. At PJ Media, they're dropping like flies. Yet another country rejects communism, and that's Chile. We don't have all the votes in just yet, but it looks like the Trump-like figure in Chile could win. I'm sure there's going to be mucking around with the votes, and that, look, the conservative won. No, wait, no, it's the communist. And one more story. Aiming to shock Japan, China pushes a wave of reprisals against Japan for its new nationalist leader, a woman, also Trump-like figure, conservative, who's buddies with Trump, and China doesn't like that. So she says Japan was willing to defend Taiwan. Oh, the Chinese didn't like that. And that's, by the way, Taiwan is free China, if you didn't know. It's not, the people that live in Taiwan are not Taiwanese, they're Chinese, just not communist. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. I appreciate you. Remember, you're under attack psychologically and biologically, so stay hip to the trick. I'm here every day, Monday through Friday, live streaming, 10 a.m. So check me out on Rumble. You can also find me on social media, X, Facebook, Get Our Minds, Social, Substack. All right, no Tuesdays with Perry tonight. I got an engagement. I got to go to a meeting. So next week for that. Otherwise, join me tomorrow, 10 a.m. live stream. Respect.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
You can't handle the truth.
This is a conspiracy.